10 years ago, I inherited my parents' bungalow. Joyce and I had been married for 15 years when they were both killed when their car was hit by a large truck. After some discussion about selling or renting, we decided to rent out our furnished bungalow for short-term rental. All we had to do was replace some of the old furniture, add new pieces, and decorate it. I am a chemistry professor and the head of a large pharmaceutical laboratory. This brings me a high salary. Joyce hasn't worked since our oldest was born. Her parents died shortly before I met her, and she received a significant inheritance from their estate. Instead of working, she became a full-time mother to our two children, Barbara and Robert. Barbara, or Babs as she liked to be called, was now 22 years old and living with her new husband. Our son Robert, known to his friends as Bob, was 20 and in his first year of university studying chemical engineering. Over the past 10 years, we have had several tenants and have been generating good income from the bungalow. It was built in the 60s and was now part of a secluded enclave, where each of the 12 estates was separated from the others by large gardens and surrounding trees, bushes, and fences. When I inherited the bungalow, we couldn't find an agent we liked, so we did all the work ourselves. I did most of the routine maintenance, calling in professionals only when necessary. Joyce handled the paperwork, as well as the cleaning and repairs needed when changing tenants. Now both children had left the nest, as they say, we began to think about what we should do. Joyce begins to feel the need for something to fill her time. We even discussed selling the bungalow and spending the money to treat ourselves to something special. I've always considered myself a very lucky guy. My children grew into responsible young adults, my career was going great, and I had a very happy marriage to a woman who was still quite beautiful and a great lover. One of the reasons my marriage was so happy was the way Joyce and I enjoyed each other's company. We were friends as well as husband and wife. We could always talk about anything. We both enjoyed sex since we went to university. Almost from the day we met, Joyce amazed me with how much she enjoyed sex. I remember when we were at a new video store in town looking for a movie to rent, Joyce discovered that they had a large selection of adult films. Before I could stop her, she had rented 3 of them. We could only watch them late in the evening, when the children were fast asleep or had a sleepover. It turned out that we were able to watch them on my computer in the office and then in the bedroom on my laptop. This led to us discovering new things, and our sex life became really interesting. I think this is where my story will begin. It was Saturday, and we were both in the bungalow. I worked in the garden while Joyce lived in the bungalow with our current tenant. She was a good tenant for almost a year. A woman in her late 30s, divorced, deceived by her estranged husband, attractive in many ways, not least her ready smile. At first, Joyce told me to keep my dirty thoughts to myself. Well, her willing smile was accompanied by a very desirable body. While I was mowing, weeding, trimming bushes, and making sure all the fences were intact, Joyce was at home with Cheryl. When all my work was finished, I walked into the kitchen and heard them both giggling. When I announced myself, they both looked at me with a very conspiratorial expression on their faces. Joyce immediately covered her. "Are you finished and ready to go home?" she asked. She then turned to Cheryl, and they both started giggling again. As we drove home, the bungalow was about 10 miles from our house. I asked Joyce what all the laughing was about. "If you're a good boy, I'll tell you tonight." That's all I learned from her. That evening, desperate to understand what was causing so many giggles, I used all my skills in the bedroom to show my wife what a good boy I could be. Lying next to me, her head on the pillow facing me, she looked into my eyes. "Darling, you wanted to know why we were giggling, didn't you?" "Yes," I replied, knowing that any time Joyce prefaced a statement with "dear," it spelled trouble. "Well, you know I've been thinking about finding something to do while you're at work." "Well, I think I've found what I want to do, or at least I'll give it a try." "Yes, I know, we talked about this several times." "Well, Cheryl was telling me what she's been up to this afternoon." "Oh yes," I was now fully alert. "I know you'll be very surprised when I tell you," she chuckled and then looked serious. "She's a working girl." "What is she like?" My God. Now I sat there in shock. Working girl. I knew what it was like to be a working girl. Cheryl is a woman of easy virtue, I almost shouted. She worked in our bungalow. Now I looked at my wife incredulously. Slowly, I remembered what my wife had just told me. No, no, definitely not. I looked at my lying wife. You definitely won't do this. It's illegal anyway, I added in protest. Before I knew what was happening, Joyce gave me a hug. Hey, hey, big guy, don't leave unconscious. It is completely legal for a woman to provide sexual services for money, provided that she does not do it on the street in a public place. Where did you get all this information? Cheryl showed me on Wikipedia. Wikipedia, bro. Well, then it must be true. Joyce eventually calmed me down with sweet talk. Seeing my wife making love to me also helped me decide to leave further discussion of this issue for later. We discussed this on Sunday. If Joyce had stated her position, I could have been listened to and discussed. Can you tell me why you want to do this? Her reasoning seemed to be that she wanted to try to do what Cheryl did just to satisfy her sexual curiosity. Whatever it is, I have given my arguments against this. You will have sex with other men. Isn't this a scam? What if you like it and want to continue? I saw my arguments rejected even when I expressed them. Then I thought about threatening her, refuse to sleep with her, divorce her. Oh God, no, I loved her too much to do that, and she hasn't done it yet, has she? That's what I'm trying to tell you, honey. It will just be sex, and I won't cheat because you will know when I do. So we'll agree on this, right? I was still trying to figure it out when Joyce continued. Doing what Cheryl does will be very different from what I do when I make love to you. This will give me the opportunity to see if I can enjoy sex without emotional attachment. This argument seemed so ridiculous. I knew how much my wife loved sex. Hell, I've been enjoying her skills for over 20 years. No, you shouldn't divorce her and lose it all just because she wants to know what it's like. Before I could say anything, she spoke again. All you have to do is imagine that I work in an office, she told me. The answer that came to my mind was, as an accountant, you see clients all day. Perhaps I shouldn't have mentioned the accountant. She figured it out faster than I did. Stan, I'm not doing this for the money, she told me. We don't need them. I certainly don't need them. I will give all the money to charity. But you will still have sex with other men, sex outside of marriage, sex without me, I objected again. My protest was completely ignored. Well then, think that I work in a unisex beauty salon, doing massages and waxing. Use your imagination, dear. No, I'll stick to the idea of office work, very boring and monotonous, I said. But there was still a voice in her head that she would have sex with other men. We sat together on the sofa and Joyce hugged me. There is one thing I need to tell you, honey. Without thinking, I asked her what it was. She kissed me tenderly. It won't affect us. You know that, right, darling? I've been thinking about that, I told her. Wouldn't any man whose wife wants to try herself as a woman of easy virtue think about it? How do we know it won't affect us? But you're only going to try it a couple times, right? Of course, dear, and it won't affect us or our sex life in any way. She really believes this, I thought to myself. What happens if 2 times is not enough for her? Will I still think that she just works in the office? I can manage a laboratory full of highly trained chemists performing complex research, but after all these years, I realized that managing my wife is a completely different matter. Over dinner on Monday, I asked Joyce if she had changed her mind. I spent the entire day thinking about our conversation and wondering how it might affect our relationship if she did decide to do this. I need to discuss something with Cheryl, so I'll meet her at the bungalow on Wednesday. Her answer seemed to answer my question. What do you want to talk to Cheryl about? Specifically, I want to ask her if I can use the bungalow. I didn't think about it, and I certainly wouldn't let her use our house. So you're going to do it. We'll talk about it on Wednesday, she ended the conversation. At dinner on Wednesday, I asked Joyce what Cheryl said about the bungalow. Patience, big man, she told me. We cleared away the dinner dishes, and I poured Joyce a glass of wine and sat down with a whiskey when she came into the room. "What were you talking to Cheryl about?" I asked. Joyce sat on my lap and hugged me before answering. "Well, honey, I can use the bungalow, and Cheryl is going to introduce me to a couple of her regulars." She kissed me again before I could say anything. It seemed that for Joyce my agreement to what she was about to do was already a foregone conclusion. Eventually, I was able to voice my opinion. "That's nice of her, but what if you don't like them?" "I don't have to love them, honey, just take their money and have sex." She did it in such a materialistic way. I almost liked it, but I knew there was more to their conversation. "You said you'd take their money. Are they going to pay you?" "Of course, dear. I won't be a woman of easy virtue if I don't get paid." I could unravel the complex chemical formula, but my wife's reasoning turned out to be completely incomprehensible to me. "What else were you talking about?" "Well, I thought it would be nice if she could help me get started. Do you mind, dear?" I wondered who exactly she was talking about. That Cheryl would help her, whatever that meant, or that she would have sex with two of Cheryl's regular clients. My wife's kiss and her insistence on going to bed early helped me decide to put off thinking until tomorrow. As I drifted into sweet sleep, I knew that my amazing wife was once again using her sexuality to allay my concerns about her supposed hobby. On Monday, I had a quiet lunch in my office. I kept thinking that Joyce might have other reasons for wanting to be a prostitute than the fact that our tenant is one. Even though Joyce told me her motives, I began to think that she might have gotten the idea from the videos we watched. I didn't think it had anything to do with what she did alone because, like me, she mostly reads stories. No, it had something to do with what we were watching together. Was it something she liked to watch or something I liked? We weren't into anything gross, preferring videos that retained some reality, such as partner swaps and kidnappings. Kidnapping was my favorite story, watching a sweet wife turn into a sexually obsessed mistress of a powerful man or the new Fatima for a rich sheikh. The more I thought about it, the more clearly I remembered that there were two videos that we recently rewatched. We've all watched them more than once, but these two were very recent. In one, the wife passed hands among the neighbors, which I thought Joyce especially liked. In another, a husband received a big promotion if he allowed his wife to become a corporate woman of easy virtue. I said she would never agree. Joyce said I was wrong and that she would do it. Suddenly, a thought occurred to me. Maybe Joyce wants to do this for me. My God, this idiot decided that I wanted her to do the same. I know I insisted on how amazingly quickly she got into it. And then I remembered Joyce's comment. I think her husband wanted her to do it. I've read stories about wives who suddenly wished they had sex with more men. Maybe I've finally found the reasons why Joyce wants to become a woman of easy virtue. When I got home on Monday night, Joyce had already prepared dinner, and I was told to go upstairs and change before the food got cold. She was quieter than usual, but she always had a smile on her face. I finally gave in and asked the obvious question, "What's going on, Joyce?" The smile disappeared for a moment. "You promise not to be mad at me." This required a cautious response. "It depends, Joyce." I thought that would be enough. "Cheryl has arranged for me to meet one of her clients tomorrow afternoon." I didn't expect this. "It's a little fast, isn't it?" I asked. I saw Joyce trying to read my thoughts. "Well, yes and no." I interrupted her. "Yes and no, Joyce. You didn't say anything against me doing this, did you, dear? The kiss I received was one of the best. Do you mind if I meet him?" Cheryl said he was in his 40s and very sweet, she added hastily. "Honey, well, I guess this is something I thought." This required a very balanced answer. Did I really have any influence in this matter? Can I impose any restrictions? Do I want to know who he is? Do I want Joyce to tell me everything after the meeting? I couldn't decide one way or the other. I was hoping that Joyce's comment about the husband wanting his wife to do it didn't influence my opinion. "Only for 1 hour. No more," I told her, feeling that I had shown at least some power. Before I left for work, Joyce assured me that she would only spend 1 hour with the gentleman, as she called her first client. Fortunately, there was a lot of work in the laboratory. We were launching a new experiment that required my participation and serious concentration. This kept everyone busy, so my growing anxiety went unnoticed. I did not ask, and Joyce did not say, exactly when her gentleman would arrive, which did nothing to ease my worries. I always had someone to talk to when something was bothering me. If it was a home or children's problem, I discussed it with Joyce. At work, I had a team that I could rely on. Now I couldn't imagine who I would want to talk to about the fact that my wife decided to try herself in the role of a woman of easy virtue, except with Cheryl. By 4 o'clock, I hoped it was all over. Joyce spent an hour with the first man outside of our marriage, and he should have left by now. Now I know that another man had sex with my wife. Was I better than the guy who let his wife become his corporate mistress? At least he got a big promotion and a lot more money. That evening, Joyce seemed to be herself, while I was on edge, as I had been all day. I couldn't decide whether to ask Joyce about her day or wait for her to tell me. As soon as I settled in front of the TV, she came and sat on my lap, hugged me, and gave me a very nice kiss. "You want to know, don't you, dear?" she finally asked. After thinking for a moment, I answered, yes and no. "Well, make up your mind, big man. Do you want to find out or not?" At that moment, I made the decision. No details, just tell me if it was good or bad. I got another kiss. "Stan, this isn't fair. I've been looking forward to telling you everything since I got home," she whispered in my ear. God, how I loved this woman. Okay, but without the gruesome details. There are no gruesome details here. Everything was quite businesslike. He was very nice, a real gentleman. I gave him what he wanted, and he thanked me very much. He even gave me a tip of 20 pounds. God knows why he uses the services. Any woman would be glad to have him. "Tip for letting him stay all day?" I interrupted. "No," I received a cold look. "I told him we only had an hour, then he went to Cheryl's and I came home." "One more kiss. Do you want me to tell you what we did?" "No, I don't want to. Maybe after next time." I assumed there would be a second time. That evening, when we made love, it seemed to me that we were both trying to prove that the men she had been with during the day no longer existed. On Wednesday night, Joyce said she was meeting another of Cheryl's regulars on Thursday afternoon. I know this is a little quick after the first gentleman, but he wanted to reschedule his appointment for later on Thursday, and Cheryl was already busy. So she called and asked if I could take him. She said that he likes it when a woman wears belted stockings and lace lingerie, and a beautiful dress, she added before I could stop her. I'll have to talk to Cheryl. The idea that a client could dictate how she should look surprised me. Are you going to dress like that for him? Cheryl said that several of her clients ask her to wear certain clothes. This was not the answer I wanted to hear. Maybe I should tell you what to wear before I have sex with you. How about something leather with lots of straps and buckles? I received a light blow to the hand with a kiss, but no answer to my question. On Thursday night, I told Joyce I didn't want to know anything about him or what they were doing. I knew she was disappointed by this, but I had the strange idea that if I didn't know what she was doing, I could maintain the illusion that Joyce was working in the accounting office. On Friday evening, Joyce seemed very pleased with herself as she sat on my lap. I saw another one of Cheryl's clients this afternoon. This both surprised and angered me. "You said it would be only 2 men, but now there are already 3, I objected. "Where did this other man come from?" I know I sounded annoyed. She interrupted me before I could finish. "I know, I'm sorry, honey. Cheryl called and asked me to help her. She somehow mistakenly booked 2 clients for the same time. She could serve both of them. Doesn't she do that sometimes? Perhaps they didn't want it. She just asked me to help her with one of them." "So you decided to go without thinking about what you told me?" "Yes, dear, I'm sorry, but I didn't have time to call you because I had to leave right away to get to the bungalow in time." It all sounded completely ridiculous, and I could already see that the situation was getting out of my control. I definitely needed to talk to Cheryl. I also needed my wife back, to which Joyce was very agreeable. Several times over the weekend, I wanted to ask her what it was like to do what Cheryl did, but at the same time, I didn't want to know any details. I knew Joyce wanted to tell me everything, but she respected my desire to remain ignorant. She also seemed to be the same woman as last week. She didn't seem different. She showed just as much affection, and our sex was as amazing as always. I just couldn't get the thought of her body being used by other men out of my head. Second week. On Wednesday night, Joyce told me she had spent the day in the bungalow with Cheryl. I already warned myself that this could happen. What were you doing? I asked. Sharing Cheryl's clients. She seemed a little hesitant before answering. No, there were no clients. We were just talking. I might join the site. A site where members advertise themselves. Understood. What happened to your intention to limit yourself to just 2 men? Sorry, 3, I corrected. It didn't affect us at all, did it, dear? And it gave me something to do while you're at work. Won't you let me continue? After all, you imagine that I work in accounting, don't you? It was too exhausting to argue about after a very stressful day in the lab. So Cheryl gets her clients through this site, I asked. Yes, she will show it to me tomorrow. At the end of the week, I finally popped the question. I settled back in front of the TV and asked Joyce to sit on my lap. I'm always amazed at how well it fits on my lap. Okay, Joyce, what happened to the site Cheryl showed you? My harshness seemed to surprise her. Oh, well, the site is good. You can tell a lot about yourself there, and it is very reliable. Men can only contact you through the website. I interrupted her. Have you already registered on it? Well, no, not yet. I wanted to tell you first. I've already posted something on the site, but my profile is not active yet. It needs to be moderated. I noticed that she said, tell you, and not ask you. Joyce, I didn't mean to be so strict. How far are you going to go with this case? She hugged me tightly and gave me a long kiss before replying, it didn't affect us at all, honey. I love you as much as I always have. We haven't stopped making love, have we? Then she stopped and just looked at me. I just want to know what it's like to have my own clients. Joyce, you can't do this. You're a married woman. I felt like I was losing this argument before it even started. Okay, I didn't stop you when you went to the bungalow a couple of times. Isn't that enough? I couldn't believe we were even having this conversation. I've been married to this wonderful, amazing woman for 25 years, and here I am on the verge of becoming a cuckold. No, not a cuckold. Cuckolds are men who allow themselves to be humiliated by participating in the promiscuity of their wives. Joyce's voice interrupted my thoughts. Stan, you're not listening to me. What? Oh, I'm sorry, honey. What were you saying? Honey, we will both work like husband and wife, doing 9-to-5 jobs. Henpecked, that's what I am. Henpecked, professor of chemistry. Yes, honey, we will both work 9 to 5, I told her. Until I can't take it anymore, I told myself, and then I'll become a divorced chemistry professor. God help me how much I love her. By the end of the first month, my wife went to the bungalow every afternoon. In my head, she worked in accounting, and that seemed to help me. I steadfastly refused to discuss anything with her about her work in the bungalow, which I knew irritated her, and, to my surprise, I myself also found it difficult to maintain such silence. Second month. My wife could work just as well in accounting because nothing has changed in her behavior. The way she dressed, her behavior towards me in the evenings and on weekends remained absolutely the same. The tenderness between us and the sex remained as frequent and delightful. By the end of the month, I may have become overconfident. At dinner, I asked her what it was like. After a moment of thoughtful staring, she replied, "This is much more than I expected, dear. Cheryl told me it would be, but I still can't believe men and sex can be so different every time." I hesitated before asking the question that bothered me most. How many clients have you had? I didn't want to use the word men. I thought you were going to ask me that, she said, 18. I could not even imagine that so many men use the services. I knew that she only went to the bungalow after lunch and left no later than 4:30 in order to be home before I arrived, which meant that she was only there for 3 or 4 hours. Were they all only there for an hour? Were there any who came more than once? The answer was a long kiss. Don't you want to know what it's like? Perhaps, but answer my question first. Well, like Cheryl, I let most of them stay a little longer than 1 hour, and 5 of them paid for an extra hour. I thought about it. What did she do to make 5 men want to pay for extra time? She usually wears me out in less than an hour. Looks like you'll have regular customers soon, I suggested. Yes. I noticed her hesitation. 2 have already been twice and 4 of my gentlemen have already booked their next visit. She sounded so proud. So, no regrets? I asked, hoping that they still exist. No, dear, no regrets. And you? If you really want me to stop, you know I will. I didn't ask her to stop, nor did I ask what exactly she was doing with the clients. I knew this disappointed her. I would tell her to stop immediately if I noticed even the slightest decline in the quality of our intimate life. Instead, my already incredibly sexy wife became even better in bed. The idea of imagining my wife working in a boring accounting office seemed to help. In fact, she was much more helpful than I expected. I even imagined how dusty books were scattered around her, and a candle was burning on her table. I guess I watched A Christmas Carol too much. It was in the 4th week that Joyce spent her days in the bungalow. It was very quiet in the laboratory on Friday afternoon. All the experiments we were working on were going smoothly, and my secretary had just brought me a cup of tea. Suddenly, I started thinking about my wife and whether she was with a client right now. In my imagination, the boring office disappeared, and in its place appeared the image of an unknown man who had sex with her. This image was so vivid that I almost spilled my tea. When I got home, I was going to ask Joyce if she had an appointment that day, but Cheryl was home instead. Before I could think, I grabbed her and kissed her. Internal tension, I don't know. When she pulled away, I just stood there and looked at her, surprised by what I did and why I did it. "Where did this come from?" she asked. "Where did you come from?" I answered. She turned towards the kitchen, and I followed her. We sat down opposite each other. "Joyce asked me to be here when you get home from work," she said. I was somewhat puzzled. "Where's Joyce?" It was so unexpected. She didn't call me. "Where is she?" I asked again. I saw the concern on Cheryl's face. She had a late meeting. "What?" I asked, shocked. "Late meeting," Cheryl repeated. "Don't worry, she's fine." She reached out and took my hand. "This is one of our regular clients, the second client she has accepted. She will be home by 7, she added. The same image that flashed in my head in the office appeared again in front of me. So many thoughts, questions, and experiences filled my head. Cheryl came up to me, sat next to me, and began stroking my hand. "Don't worry about your wife. She was just late at work. The numbers didn't add up," she said with a smile. "Yes, just another day at the office." Looks like Joyce told Cheryl how I was handling the situation. Then an unexpected thought occurred to me. I didn't know where this question came from, but suddenly it became very important, although I wasn't sure how to ask it. "Do you ever accept a client together?" Cheryl took a few seconds to respond. "We have clients who pay for both of us." It took me a few seconds to wrap my head around the idea of Cheryl and Joyce working together, both servicing the same man. I even wondered what it would be like. "What's it like, you and Joyce together with one man?" I finally asked. "Wouldn't you rather ask Joyce what it's like to be with the same man?" she answered. "She didn't mention you two working together. Maybe she doesn't want me to know about it. Maybe because you never asked her about her clients and what she does with them. Does she like it with all these different men? Maybe it's time for you to ask her about it. I know she wants to tell you everything." When Cheryl left, there were still 15 minutes left before Joyce arrived, and I continued to think about everything Cheryl had told me. If the man she was with now was one of her regular clients, then how often did he come to her? Cheryl said this is one of their regular customers, so is he one of the people who booked time for two? Looks like it's time to start asking questions. Until then, Joyce had always come home before me, so I never had to think about her doing anything other than working in a boring office. But as soon as she walked through the door, reality hit me in the face. My wife just returned home after being with another man for the last 2 hours or more. Although funny, she looked the same as always. Almost as soon as she closed the door behind her, I grabbed her hand, pulled her into the living room, and sat her on my lap. It immediately became clear that something had changed. She smelled different. It was a perfume she had never worn before. Did this man pay her to wear this perfume, or did she buy it especially for him? Suddenly, I didn't want her to sit on my lap. I think you should take a shower, I told her. She stood up from my lap. I was just about to do it before you grabbed me. While she was showering, I ordered Chinese takeout, and when she came out of the bathroom, everything was already set on the kitchen table. Now tell me about him, I told her as we sat down opposite each other. She looked at me for a moment, then sighed. So you finally want to know what it's like to be with these different men. I was struck by her condescending tone, as if she now didn't care whether I asked her about it or not. No, right now I just want to know about the man who was with you tonight. She gave me a cold look in response to my remark. Then she said that he was 62 years old and very rich. His wife died 2 years ago, and he has no intention of getting married again, but he needs to have sex, so he pays for it, she explained. He asked me to wear a white dress with lace underwear and play the role of a loving wife. We were very close, she added. I was shocked when she said they were close, even more shocked by the fact that he was with her twice. I thought that only she and I were close. Are you intimate with other men? I asked. What I really wanted to ask was, is he your lover? If that's what they want, she replied with a smile, you know how much I love being close to you. Yes, I knew. And now she tells me that not only is she having sex, but she is sharing the same intimacy with them that she shares with us. This means she kisses them the same way she kisses me. For some reason, this turned out to be more difficult to accept than the fact of sex itself. Did you buy clothes for him? No, he gave me extra money to buy it. Did he give you this perfume? Her answer shocked me. No, I bought them for him. Why? There was some money left over, and he said it was his wife's favorite perfume. It made me wonder what else he told her. While I was digesting everything she had already told me, she continued to tell me how much she liked that all men are different, how different each sex is. Have you noticed that sometimes our sex is different? She asked. I noticed and was surprised by how she used the word sex. I thought we were making love. Do all your gentlemen give you money to buy clothes? Of course not, dear. I have to buy them myself. My gentlemen often tell me how they like me to dress, usually in terms of the underwear they prefer, so now I have a pretty decent wardrobe in the bungalow. I knew how much Joyce loved shopping for clothes, but I was surprised that so many of her customers told her what to wear. How much do you spend on clothes? I asked, thinking about what else they could have asked her to do. It's fun to dress like a stranger asked me to, she replied, not bothering to answer my question. How many clients do you have in 2 months, Joyce? She reached across the table, took my hands, and squeezed them tightly. If you mean my regular gentlemen, like this evening, then I have 9 of them. It was slow at first, but I had 7 new gentlemen this month and 3 have already signed up for next month, she said with obvious pride. I had no idea that there were so many men in our area who had nothing better to do in the evenings than pay for sex. She must be making a fortune. I had one more question. How old are they? Well, I think the youngest gentleman is 29 and the oldest is 72. I could understand why a 72-year-old man might engage in paid sex, but not a 29-year-old man. I wonder if he was as energetic as I was at his age. Once again, I began to worry about how this whole story was affecting my wife. That night, I took Joyce out to dinner. I just wanted us to be husband and wife again. I didn't tell her what to wear, but as always, she looked dazzling. It was almost the same as the last time we went to the restaurant. We talked about recent conversations with children on the phone. We discussed the house and what could be improved. We even discussed where we could move if we sold this house and bought something smaller. We didn't talk about bungalows. As we made love that night, I had to push thoughts of all those men out of my head several times. Third month. The third month began almost the same as the second month I studied. I still haven't asked her about the men she serviced and whether she sees them again or what they do together. I think it was as unpleasant for her as it was for me, but I still tried to maintain the illusion that Joyce worked in accounting. On Friday of the second week, when Joyce sat on my lap and gave me a hug and a kiss. "I love you, Stan darling," she whispered in my ear. "Thank you for allowing me to continue dating my gentleman. I think it has made our sex life even better. Isn't that right, dear?" I thought for a moment. Has our sex life gotten better? It seems like we've started having sex more often than making love. "You sure like to try new things," I replied. "I know, dear, so will you mind if I start going to the bungalow in the mornings from Monday?" Her request wasn't all that unexpected. She hasn't returned home before 7 o'clock 3 times in the last 2 months. "Are some of your regular clients now wanting to meet in the morning?" I asked. "Then it won't be difficult for you, dear." "I had to turn down some gentlemen," she said. My compliance was rewarded with a very sensual display of my wife's greatly improved seductive skills, which made me wonder how much she was learning from Cheryl. I'm just sorry that all the other men in her life kept invading my thoughts. It was just that making love seemed less and less common, despite what Joyce had told me. Our evenings didn't change much. After dinner, we settled down in front of the TV, usually with a glass of wine and a glass of whiskey for me, or read the current book. Joyce no longer offered to watch anything from our DVD collection. Over the weekend, Joyce was busy doing the things she used to do in the morning while I completed the items on my to-do list. Fourth month. 3 times this month, my wife wrote to me that she would be home after 7. Each time she asked to order Chinese or Indian food for 8 hours. She was always home by 7:30, with one drink in time before her order was delivered. This was the fourth message from Joyce. This time she texted that she wouldn't be back until 10 and Cheryl would bring Chinese food for me. To say I was worried would be an understatement. I have already expressed my dissatisfaction with the fact that she does not return home until 7. This alone was already complicating the illusion for me that Joyce worked in the accounting department, and this message almost destroyed it. When I got home, I took it out on Cheryl and then spent the rest of the evening apologizing. After we finished dinner, Cheryl wanted to leave, but I persuaded her to stay. I poured Cheryl a glass of wine and some whiskey for myself, and we sat down opposite each other. "Do you know what's happening to my wife?" I asked her. This was a difficult question for me because I was afraid to hear the answer. I just hoped that she would be honest with me. She looked at me for a moment. "She just has sex, that's all. That's what we get paid for. Some ask us to act or dress like girlfriends or wives or someone in their fantasies, but that's all she does. I have several men who treat me this way, some even bring gifts. I have a list of things on my website that I like." "Do you work late?" Of course, many men can only come after work or sometimes spend time with us instead of going to the pub in the evening. I thought for a moment. Is she dating more than one man today? Is that why she won't be back until 10? Yes, Stan, that's most likely why. I know that the man who was with her before is only staying for 2 hours. 2 hours with the same man, what can they do for 2 hours? The more answers I received, the more questions I had. How many of them stay 2 hours? How many regular customers does she have? Does she often see the same men? I just dumped my questions on her. Cheryl sat next to me and took my hand. "Stan, calm down. You really need to talk to Joyce about this. I know she has about a dozen regular customers who come 2 or 3 times a month. I also know that some of her clients spend a couple of hours with her. This is normal for any working girl." But she's not a working girl, she's my wife, a voice in my head told me. Is that old man who lost his wife one of them? Yes, he comes every 2 weeks. I didn't ask, but I wondered how much time he spent with her. Perhaps it's not the clients that I should be worried about, but Joyce. Stan, please talk to Joyce about this before it's too late, Cheryl told me. Perhaps it was already too late, I thought. Then, for some irrational reason, I asked Cheryl to show me where to find my wife's page on her website. When she showed me, she added, "You know you don't have to go to my website to spend a couple of hours with me." She giggled, but I knew she was serious. As she left, I thanked her for her honesty. On my wife's page on her website, I was surprised how much information there was about her, even her age and shoe size. There were also 6 very explicit and very seductive photographs. Any potential client would know exactly what they are paying for. The first photo showed my beautiful wife's very curvy body wearing the sexiest lingerie. In another photo, where she lay naked on her side, her long legs and shapely hips were visible. Another photo very seductively showed off her delicious ass as she coquettishly looked over her shoulder at the camera. I didn't expect to see the description she gave of herself and how she would treat a client. Knowing my wife, I could back up every word. She even mentioned her extensive wardrobe of dresses and lingerie. There was a note at the end that the other lady was also available if the client was interested. On the right was a list of services she offered. I thought all Joyce did was a little kissing, cuddling, and sex. After I saw her pictures and read everything she said about herself and how she treated clients, and then saw the list of services she offered, my attitude towards my wife changed greatly. When she returned home, Joyce apologized for being so late. "I'll make it up to you tomorrow," she told me. "I'm a little tired, so do you mind if I go straight to bed?" I followed her 15 minutes later, and she was already asleep. Joyce continued to be loving and caring towards me, and our sex was almost as frequent as ever. Now that I knew what she was doing, it became increasingly difficult for me to make love to her. The lack of intimacy we once shared seemed to go unnoticed by my wife. 5th month. On a Tuesday evening at the beginning of the month, Joyce told me that she would be spending the night at the cottage on Wednesday. I was very unhappy about this and expressed my feelings quite violently. She then told me that her latest client would not be staying the night, but would be leaving so late that there was no point in her driving home and then returning for an appointment on Thursday morning. Joyce simply brushed off my concerns, not like before where she would sit on my lap and kiss me passionately until I was sure. I was still unhappy when we got into bed. I received a hug and a goodnight kiss with the comment that I would get through this. The following week, when Joyce told me she would be spending Tuesday at the cottage with a client, I almost lost my temper. "Joyce, you've gone too far this time. You won't spend the night with another man. This must stop." "This is what I like to do," Joyce interrupted. She screamed, but so did I. I tried to soften my voice because we never yelled at each other. "I know this is what you do, Joyce. It just went much further than you said. It was supposed to be something you do during the day while I'm at work. Then you started staying in the evenings, and now you spend the whole night at the dacha. It's only 1 or 2 nights a month. Can't you do without me for that long?" As always, I knew I wouldn't get much done with my argument, but I had to try. "It's not a matter of going without you a couple of nights a month, Joyce. Oh God, how can I say this? This is the realization that you are sleeping with another man, that you are intimate with him, allowing him to do God knows what to you all night. This is simply beyond my capacity for patience. You're my wife, Joyce. Don't you see what you're doing to us, darling?" "First of all, he won't do this to me all night," she countered. "We'll both need some sleep." I saw how determined she was. "You'll do it anyway, won't you?" "Yes, why not? Like I said, it's only 2 or 3 times a month." That first night that my wife spent at the dacha, I hardly slept. Any illusion that she was working in a dusty accounting department was now completely shattered. Everything became suspicious since she started staying at the dacha in the evenings. I didn't know who she spent the night with. For too long, I have buried my head in the sand, as the saying goes. I realize now that I should have taken Cheryl's advice and talked to my wife a couple of months ago. Again, the thought of divorce crossed my mind. I've seen the effects on husbands, and it's terrible. One of my best friends found out that his wife had been having an on-off affair for almost 2 years. He got drunk, got into an accident, and almost killed someone. He lost everything. The other was a colleague of mine in the lab. His wife was so obviously cheating on him that everyone thought she did it on purpose to force him to file for divorce. When he refused, she simply went somewhere with that guy. He's still trying to find her. No matter what they called me, divorce was still not an option for me. When I got home on Wednesday, Joyce was waiting for me in a black dress I'd never seen and the highest heels I'd ever seen her wear. She already had a large glass of whiskey in one hand. "Have a drink, honey. I have something I want to show you." I took the glass from her, unable to take my eyes off the dress. The bodice allowed a glimpse of the wonderful cleavage created by her shapely breasts. The hem revealed the splendor of her bare legs to the knees and above. The dress caught my attention as much as the beautiful woman who wore it. I was still holding the full glass in my hand when I heard her say to me, "Drink, honey, you need to see more than just my dress." The glass was very full, more whiskey than I usually poured myself, and I know I drank it too fast. I heard Joyce call me a good boy. Through the drunken haze, I smelled the scent of my favorite perfume. Somewhere a voice told me that I was being seduced by a very beautiful and very experienced woman. Another voice told me to stop her before it was too late. I told myself that I still loved her when I allowed my wife to lead me into our bedroom. With every step up the stairs, the black dress revealed tantalizing hints of the woman I was following. "Now, darling," she whispered softly and sensually in my ear, "I told you I have something I want to show you." The little black dress moved to the side, and after a moment it slowly slid off my beautiful wife's body. What man could resist such a temptation? Greater men than I have lost fortunes, battles, empires, even their crowns, to the temptation of a beautiful woman. All my intentions to reproach my wife for her night at the dacha were forgotten. Perhaps she could even be forgiven after that. I saw her smile. "Darling, now that you know what I do when I spend the night with one of my gentlemen, you won't have to worry about me anymore, will you?" I tried to understand her logic and must have muttered something because after a few kisses and hugs, I must have fallen asleep. When I woke up, the sun was shining through the window, the smell of strong coffee, and my wife's voice said that breakfast was almost ready. I was too stunned last night to talk about anything other than everyday things over breakfast. I received a big hug before leaving for the lab. "I love you, honey," Joyce whispered in my ear. "Now don't worry anymore about me spending the night at the dacha. We're just having sex, like I showed you last night." When my secretary brought me my first cup of coffee, I told her I didn't want to be disturbed for the rest of the morning. "Only if it's an emergency," I added as she closed the door. Left alone in the silence and familiar surroundings of my office, I slowly collected my thoughts. One thing became obvious to me. For the entire time I knew her, Joyce somehow suppressed a very high level of sexual desire to a level that was familiar to me throughout our years of marriage. It was now clear that once she had discussed with Cheryl what she was doing and then spent time with the first two men, she could no longer suppress her excessive sexuality. What I experienced last night was an expression of sexuality far beyond anything I have ever experienced in our entire marriage. The question was, can I live with this? The following Monday evening, Joyce told me that a client wanted her to go with him for 4 days the following week. If I hadn't talked to Barbara, I would have objected vehemently, but now it was just another situation I had to endure. "How well do you know him?" I asked, trying to show at least some concern for her safety. "He already spent one night with me," she replied, and then quickly continued before I could say anything. "He has to go to a business conference. I'll be more like an escort for him." After a long kiss, my wife asked me if I minded, but didn't give me time to answer. "It's just Monday through Thursday, and then he will take me straight to the dacha on Friday. I already have a client booked for the day." Then she said, "It will cost him £5,000. I suppose I should have been proud that a man would pay my wife that much to spend 4 nights with her. It was obvious that she would be doing much more than just accompanying him to the conference. When Joyce got home on Tuesday, the first thing she said was that she had a sore on her lip. I immediately suspected it was something else. "Did you go to the doctor?" For a moment, she just looked at me. "Yes, and it's not what you're thinking. It's just a bad ulcer. I need to rinse my mouth and not kiss," she added. For the rest of the week and weekend, everything seemed normal. There were no late evenings or nights at the dacha. My work days were normal. Joyce seemed fine when I returned home at the usual time. We enjoyed dinner together as usual. Our evenings were completely ordinary. We went to bed at our usual time, and we had sex despite the ban. On Monday morning, I assumed that she went to the dacha after I left for work so that the person she was going to leave with could pick her up from there. Before I left for work, Joyce gave me a big hug, still no kisses, but lots of assurances of her love for me. I won't see her until Friday night. Now my secretary was my conscience and knew what my wife was doing. She also took great care of me. There were more cups of tea and coffee, and the biscuits tasted better. Twice that week, I was tempted to call Cheryl and ask for a meeting. When I came home on Friday evening, Joyce was already waiting for me in that same little black dress. There wasn't a big glass of whiskey this time, but she had a worried look on her face as she approached me. "I missed you so much, darling," she said. Before I could respond or comment on how much I missed her while she was away, I was dragged upstairs. I recoiled in surprise. "What's that on your tongue?" I asked. She stuck out her tongue, and I saw it. The silver ball is right in the middle of her tongue, about an inch from the tip. "When did you do this?" I asked reproachfully. She knew I didn't like piercings ever since our daughter got her nose pierced as a teenager. "Last week, that's why I couldn't kiss you." So there was no ulcer. She shook her head. "It was a tongue piercing." I knew about tongue piercings, but because of my aversion, I never asked my wife to do it. "You lied to me because you knew I didn't like piercings. Why did you do this?" I was angry. "I had to. Thomas told me to do it." "Thomas!" I shouted. Now I was furious. "Did this Thomas tell you to pierce your tongue?" For several seconds I could not utter a word. "Did you pierce your tongue because he told you?" I tried to keep my voice within limits. "I take it that Thomas is the man you've been with since Monday?" My wife looked very worried. "He wanted everything to heal before we left." I just looked at her, trying to figure out what else my wife had lied to me about. My wife said the food would be delivered by 8. At dinner, while my wife was talking about some small things, I was still thinking about her tongue piercing. The fact that Thomas told her to do this was not the biggest problem for me. She should have understood that I had already come to terms with the fact that men ask her to do anything for them. My problem was that she lied to me and told me it was sore. The lies and deception are what hurt me more than why she did it. Now the problem in my marriage has become much more serious. Perhaps it's time to seriously think about making changes in your life. The following Monday evening, when Joyce sat next to me, I knew something had changed because she didn't sit on my lap. "Stan, honey, since I went with Thomas last week, something has changed." I wanted to say something like, "Really?" But she stopped me with a gesture. When I accompanied Thomas to the conference, I met another girl who was there for another participant, and we talked. She told me about the agency she has been working for almost 3 years. Unlike most others, they specialize in providing more mature ladies like myself to accompany middle-aged and older men. After everything she told me, I am sure that it will be better for us if I work as an escort and not as a woman of easy virtue. This was the first time she called herself that. "Wow, Joyce dear, so instead of having several men every day, you will be with one man for several days." I saw that she did not like my intervention. She looked at me with irritation instead of kissing me as she had done before. "If that's how you want to put it, Stan, then yes, I'll probably be called on for a few days or even a whole week." It was probably the look on my face at the thought of another man having sex with my wife for a week that made her add, "Anyway, honey, I won't need the cottage anymore, so maybe we can sell it and go on a cruise because being an escort means I won't be busy all the time." I wondered if she had discussed this with Cheryl and told all her regular customers. Joyce's first order from the new agency arrived the following Thursday. I thought it was too quick for the agency to assess her suitability for the job and then find her first client. Perhaps the woman she met at the conference made a recommendation, but after her lie about the tongue piercing, I rather believed that Joyce was already in touch with the agency even before the supposed meeting with that girl at the conference. When I told Barbara about this, she insisted that I not be left alone at home and invited me to her favorite restaurant. I knew that Barbara was a widow when I hired her, and that she was 5 years younger than me. Not only was she a wonderful secretary, but she was also a very attractive woman with, as I now knew, a wonderful caring personality. Thursday night, I felt terrible sadness knowing that my wife was in our bedroom getting dressed for an evening with another man. She asked if I wanted to look, but I politely declined, even though I had already seen expensive linen laid out on the bed before I went downstairs. Finally, she came down the stairs wearing a dress I had never seen before. She made a turn in front of me. "Well, what do I look like?" Her hair had been styled at the salon during the day, and she looked amazing, much better than she ever looked when I accompanied her somewhere. "You look great. Where is he taking you?" "I don't know. All they told me was his name, George, and that I should wear a long dress and a taxi would pick me up." "Well, Joyce, I hope the money is worth it." I doubt she understood my double meaning, and she didn't even hint that she cared about how I would spend the evening. Joyce turned sharply towards the door when there was a knock. Before my wife left, she turned to me and kissed me on the cheek. £500 after agency commission," she whispered before I received another kiss on the cheek. "Don't wait for me, dear. If I'm lucky, I might not come home tonight." When the door closed, I felt terribly alone. I knew nothing about the man my wife was with or where she was. For the first time, I thought seriously about my life without Joyce. Barbara was the first woman I went to a restaurant with, other than my wife, in a very long time. I liked her favorite restaurant, her outfit, and the conversation we had. Joyce didn't come back that night, and the next day when I came home, she was already preparing dinner. As I expected, she immediately came up to me, hugged me, and kissed me for a long time. She looked surprised when I pushed her away, but I had spent most of the day preparing myself for what I knew would be a difficult conversation with my wife, and I wanted to have it before my resolve weakened under her kisses. "Save dinner, Joyce. I need to talk to you," I said, walking into the living room. To calm my nerves, I poured myself a whiskey and a glass of wine for Joyce. She was still standing in the doorway, so I showed her where to sit. She looked worried. "Darling, what happened? Did something happen at work?" This gave me the opportunity to start. "No, Joyce, everything is fine at work. It's what's happening here that I want to discuss." I took a sip of whiskey, collecting my thoughts. "This work must stop right now. You are my wife. I cannot and will not allow you to humiliate me anymore." I've never felt humiliated, so I don't know why I said that. Joyce picked up on this immediately. "I never humiliated you. No one except Cheryl knows what I do. Unless you told the whole team yourself," she added very angrily. "It was the first time I lied to my wife. Why should I tell the people I work with what my wife does? It's about me. I feel humiliated because my wife spends time with other men, giving them what is rightfully mine. I've had enough, Joyce, enough." Joyce tried to sit on my lap so quickly that I almost spilled my whiskey. "No," I told her. "I don't want you to sit on my lap until we're done with this conversation." When she returned to her seat, she began to put pressure on me. "Honey, please, I never intended to humiliate you. You didn't say anything about feeling humiliated when I met men at the dacha, so what difference does it make if I work as an escort?" How does she always manage to turn everything around? I realized again that my wife is a much better negotiator than I ever will be. I knew I was taking too long to think about the answer. I knew where you were, was my feeble reply. Oh, come on, honey. What difference does it make where I was? All we did was have dinner, go to the theater, and then come back to it. Everything is exactly the same as when I spent the night at the dacha. This is what you should be doing to me, not to a complete stranger. Now I need to book an evening with you through an agency. I tried to show my anger. I'm guessing you spent the entire night having sex with him. Now Joyce was glaring at me. Yes, all night, if that's what you're interested in. And no, you don't have to book me through an agency. My carefully crafted arguments seemed to desert me, all because I said I felt humiliated. Then Joyce suddenly stood up and ran into the kitchen. Probably something had burned. God, what a banal plot this is, I thought, pouring myself more whiskey. I wanted to continue the conversation over dinner, but Joyce was more interested in telling me how being an escort would be so much better for both of us. If the agency gets a good review from the gentleman yesterday, I should have a new assignment sometime next week. It seemed that my argument about humiliation was completely forgotten. My wife actually had another order for Wednesday night. She returned home at 1:30 in the morning. Then another order on Saturday. This time she didn't return until Sunday morning. On both occasions, I went to my favorite restaurant with Barbara. She charmed me both times with her outfit, smile, and brilliant conversations. When I returned home on Saturday night, I realized that the lady I had dinner with had become more important to me than the woman I was married to. Several times during the week, I tried to express to my wife my arguments that she was giving other men what should belong only to me, her husband. It seems my wife is a lot more stubborn in her views than I ever realized. My patience finally ran out on Friday when she told me that the agency had booked her a trip to America with a professor who was going to give a series of lectures. He's already used the agency several times, she told me as I sat in stunned silence. I saw his resume and reviews of other women who accompanied him in America. They all left very positive comments about him. She stopped and looked at me for a moment. Well, are you going to say something? When are you leaving? It seemed right to me to ask. The taxi will come for me at 2 o'clock on Sunday. I'll be back on Friday. This professor, how old is he? He's 59 and lost his wife 8 years ago. It seemed like there was nothing more to say. My wife apparently took this as my consent. On Friday evening, we settled down in front of the TV. Joyce, are you still going to America with the professor next week? Yes, you know I'm going to, darling. Well, you need to know something. If you go to America with a professor, when you return, all your things will be moved to the dacha. In the complete silence that followed my words, Joyce stared at me. What did you say? After a moment, I saw how she realized the meaning of what I had just said. Are you going to do what with my things? I'll take them to the dacha, I repeated. Why? I'll just go accompany him for 5 days. Joyce, I love you, but I can't live like this anymore. I took a deep breath to calm my nerves. What I was about to say could end our marriage. For 6 months, Joyce, I endured your obsession, first during the day, then all day, then in the evenings, then at night, and now it has lasted a whole week. You are my wife, and it's time to end this. I spoke very slowly. I will no longer share you with others. The look on my wife's face was pure shock. Well, I just told her something completely unexpected. I can't stop now. There is no time to cancel the trip. You should have told me earlier. My wife looked desperate. Why didn't you tell me earlier? I had to think things through, make decisions. I needed professional advice. Joyce, this is final on my part. If you go to America, I will file for divorce. I didn't plan to tell her that. Now I have her cornered. Oh God, my wife finally realized. Stan, you can't divorce me, I love you. We've been married for 25 years. Please, Stan, I'll stop after this, I promise. I know she called the agency. She told me there wasn't enough time to cancel the trip. When I return, I will never have sex with another man again. She made this promise to me several times. Unfortunately for Joyce, I didn't believe her. At 2 o'clock on Sunday afternoon, I stood at the open door, almost in tears, watching the taxi take my wife away from me. I told her again where her things would be when she returned. Her last words were a promise to stop seeing men after this client. Having difficulty containing my emotions, I slowly closed the door behind me. I was full of resentment towards my wife for forcing me to make these decisions. Next week, I had to move all my wife's things to the dacha, where she would be given divorce papers when she returned. Barbara insisted that I spend the evening at her apartment in the city. "I won't let you be alone in this house," she told me. My wife seemed completely indifferent to how I would spend the evening. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think, click to the next one. Click to the next one. Click to the next one. Click